Everybody here that needs to be here? And then some? We'll call the meeting to order. Nate, you got something for us?
No, I'm just prepared. I was telling Bill earlier, I'm a little
Pretty
worried.
quick.
He brought coffee, so
Oh, yeah,
do a 6 o'clock meeting. So.
yeah. All right, I know Kathy has said that she's prepared some language for advisory committee that we can start with or not. We can kind of recap everything that we've done so far, if you'd like.
I think, well, we had that handout from the last meeting. I'm wondering if we could maybe start there,
Sure.
just from the response, looking at the response times, and looks like you guys are suggesting to bring that down for the city.
Which one are you on?
The one with the green graph, or if you have it in
It's like
color.
this.
Yeah.
Yep. You're ready?
So I think in the previous meeting, it was 9 minutes, 59 seconds, right? And now you're saying under 8 minutes? Is that literally?
So, again, Bjorn Peterson, Medical Director. What we're saying is that there'd be this is an NFPA standard too. It's a 60-second turnout time from the dispatch tones to when the crew gets in the ambulance and starts moving, or up to, that would be the max allowed. And then 8 minutes from there to get to the scene. So together, 9 minutes from dispatch alert until arrival on scene.
Gotcha. And that's the fractile,
Correct.
not the average.
Correct. That's, the NFPA standard is written as fractile, so I don't think we can compare that to any average.
Gotcha. I like the graphic representation here between fractile. I mean, this kind of explains the fractile a little bit better than the average.
I think, the reason I wanted to communicate that is just to understand that if you put in an average time, it does sound better because it's going to be lower, but you also open the risk to having a much wider spread of times, whereas the fractile helps constrain all of those times, even though the number sounds a little bit higher. Of course, the reality is that our times are going to be under these numbers. They have been in the city of Stillwater, as you have access to that data, and that's, I think, the best comparison for what we're trying to go for here.
Right, along those lines, because the fractile time in Stillwater is 8 minutes, 22 seconds, so, and then you got 9 minutes right now for the proposal here, it looks like. So I didn't know if would there be a way to shave a few seconds off that? 8:45, something? I don't want to make it too tight, but I also want to, I'd like to tighten it down to closer to that Stillwater time if possible.
Yeah, I think part of this is until we actually do some responses
Yeah.
from the hospital into the city and figure that out, I really don't even know what to expect. We're comfortable with the 9 minutes, comfortable saying that we expect to be under that, closer to the Stillwater times. We just have to wait and see. It's an unknown at this
What we're
point.
comparing this to?
The 9 minutes? That's the national, you're talking about St. Croix?
Yeah.
No, because we don't have the data specifically for the City of Hudson response. So we can tell you what we are aware of as far as the whole St. Croix service area, but we can't narrow it down to just the
I
city.
thought I remembered something that was in our testimony that was like 13 minutes.
Yeah. I don't-
I think it was 12 something.
12?
Is what I've seen, yeah.
For the city or
For
service
us,
area?
for-
Oh.
I'm not sure if that was the whole area or.
So Rich,
That was the whole area. I don't know that that was.
yeah,
city.
we had a document that included the whole area. I don't know if you guys saw that, but the whole area for St. Croix EMS was 12 to 14 fractile.
Okay.
And that was 2016 data. I can't talk about recent, so we want to be careful with that. That's why I didn't want to base
Well, before we
our,
start setting the bar, I think it would be nice if we knew what what we're doing right now.
Right.
And I'm not suggesting that you need
yeah,
to.
that's not where, we don't have access to that. We did see
But
that chart.
I
so.
think that that's just reasonable, that, if that 9 minutes could be significantly better than what we've got here.
One thing I'd like to stress here is this is the bar. There's no one in our crew, or John or Matt or myself, that would expect our crews to slow down because we had a 8:59 NFPA standard to achieve. We're trying to get out the door and to the scene as quickly as possible, and the crews aren't going, gee, I have 9 minutes to do this. You want to put the ambulance at the scene providing care as soon as you can. So, and we also included that 6-minute and 8-minute drive times. I think that was referenced as a River Falls type approach. Maybe Jim, you brought that up when they did their evaluation, that there was a drive time. Certain things are going to be what they are. If they're at the edge of that 8-minute, you're putting people at risk, possibly if getting there and as a 6-minute average is your only goal. So we want to be careful that we're not asking, I guess from my perspective, ambulances to fly just to get there. We have to look at the bigger picture too. So.
And I also want to clarify the Stillwater numbers, those are actuals. You don't have a contract currently with Stillwater. You don't need a contract with.
We don't have contracts, no.
Sure.
Who knows what the winter, all of those factors as to whether that another year might have been 840 or something.
Right.
And just to be clear too, on this graph that shows our times from 2018, those do not include the hospital transfers, because obviously those are going to be basically zero for the most part, and that's going to skew that to the left. So you can see it's just 911 response, mutual aid, or intercept. The interfacility transfers were excluded from that. I think the other thing that John mentioned is we would also, and I think this could come in with the advisory committee or the public safety commission, set goals. So we can have the contractual language, and then we can set goals that are lower than that. I think give us a few months to settle in and see what the actual drive times are and the response times are. And we can hone in on some goals that we can hold ourselves to and that there can be a little bit of discussion about.
Does it make sense to have something like that in the contract language? Just what you said?
So
Or
what
I guess I'm looking
one
at
of the
more
thoughts was
abstract.
to maybe leave some of the performance metrics a little bit vague, because we don't know over 10 years, that's kind of the different topic there, but over 10 years, what is the government going to require us to report? What things are going to be changing that we're going to be held to? So I guess some of that I would prefer to leave up to the committee to decide.
I guess that's exactly the language
Yeah.
that I'm wondering, should it be in there that it, that this committee can make recommendations, changes to that response time? Does that make sense?
I think that's very reasonable.
I think we're completely comfortable with that. And Carl, I think Kathy, we've had a similar discussion in the past, so I don't think that's unreasonable at all, Bill.
Yeah, we've got reviewing response times and reviewing and setting goals, regarding response times is fine.
Yeah. That we will, and we do this already, but we set annual goals for many of our departments, and that's a very doable thing. It's an expected thing, and we'll do that together. That doesn't mean halfway through the year you think, I think we can do better than this. We can move things around. So.
Okay.
Nick, can you, just a vocab word here for me? Where it says criteria to evaluate ongoing resource allocation, and it says unit hour utilization is greater than 0.5 for 3 consecutive months. Can you just explain what?
Yes, I knew that was going to come up, and I didn't want to complicate the document. So unit hour utilization, UHU, is a measure used in EMS to determine how busy a unit is. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Well, there's not a lot of factors that go into it, but interpreting it, there's several factors. So all you do is take the number of runs, the number of calls that an ambulance responds to, divided by the number of hours that ambulance is in service.
Wait, can you say it again, the number?
So the numerator is the number of runs
Okay.
that an ambulance goes on. Denominator is the number of hours an ambulance is in service.
Okay,
So if an ambulance is doing 12 calls in a 24-hour period, that's a 0.5 unit hour utilization rate.
oh, wow.
That number is used for, agencies can determine their budget break-even number for an ambulance. How much does it cost to turn the wheels and transport a patient? And for a lot of agencies, it might be a 0.2, 0.15, something like that. And so you know that if you're below that, you're not running as efficient as you need to be. But there's also another side of that where if that number is getting too high, you're starting to burn out the crews. You're becoming busy enough that you're at risk of not having a resource available when the next call comes in. And some of that depends on transport distances. You know, it's a lot different here than it would be for, let's say, like Lakes Region Ambulance up in the St. Croix Falls area, where they cover a huge area and there's very few hospitals that they can transport to. So they might target a lower UHU before they decide to review their resource allocation. So 0.5, you know, you're probably going to burn out staff when you're getting into that area, more so than even having trucks available to respond to the next call.
So you want to keep it less than 0.5 is what you're saying?
Correct.
So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, if it's hitting that, then that definitely is a trigger to talk about adding trucks or adding staff, yeah. Sometimes it's even shortening shifts. Maybe you can do that for 8 hours, but you can't do that for 24 hours. So there's a number of things that you can do when it hits that point.
Okay.
I was just looking up NFPA, and I'm seeing that there's two NFPA 1710 or 1720.
1710, 1720, I believe, deals with career fire departments and the fire apparatus response primarily. 1710 has the ALS EMS response specifically in it.
Gotcha.
We have an expert in the room here who probably can answer that.
I'm not sure how to ask this, so just bear with me for a second. So I'm just trying to, can you help me understand, so with dynamic deployment, if I'm understanding it correctly, the units are in motion, and let's say a transfer is taken out of Hudson Hospital to Twin Cities, for example. One would come down kind of in Stillwater. Is this right, that it would be sort of like available to kind of go to either side? So you'd be moving it kind of in position, or how does that just play out practically speaking?
John Muller, EMS manager for Lakeview Hospital. It depends on the scenario you're looking at, Paul, but we'll just assume that we're talking the contract, which is 2 ambulances 24 hours a day here in Hudson. So the first ambulance, and we put together a, there you go. But the first ambulance goes out on a call, nothing changes. The second ambulance continues to be available here in the town of Hudson, and we'll just assume a second call comes in right behind it. So the minute that ambulance gets dispatched, our dispatch immediately moves an ambulance from Stillwater over here to Hudson. So at the same time, so they give the call 1234 Main Street for 806 in Hudson, and at the same time they say Stillwater truck for coverage in Hudson, and 802 or 803 answers up, and they move over here. So they immediately get in the truck and drive over here. They need to be here in the community. So
Talk about the difference between that and mutual aid.
yeah, again, so dynamic deployment is we're moving the resource before we need the resource. Where in mutual aid, in most cases that don't have the ability to have that backup like Lakeview does, you would be out of trucks at that point, and then you would rely on mutual aid. So if another call came in, you'd call mutual aid, and then your time is going to be whatever it takes that other service to respond to your community.
Okay. Can you help me understand the reverse, meaning the Minnesota side is busy.
Yep.
Can you explain how that
Yep.
would work?
So again, we did put an example together there. That's the bottom scenario. So in that scenario, the Lakeview truck goes on a call. We'll say Lakeview 802 goes on a call.
Nate?
Nothing happens. A second call comes in Stillwater, so now Lakeview 803 goes on a call. At that point, what we do is we move North St. Paul down to Highway 36 and County Road 17. We call that our middle coverage point. So North St. Paul shifts over, and now let's say they go out on a call.
Okay.
At that point, we pull one of the Hudson trucks over to Highway 95 and 36. We actually sit at the Bayport Bank parking lot. So one of the trucks from here would move over there to cover that side of the river, but you still have the other Hudson truck here. Now let's assume that truck goes out.
Okay.
Then we would move the Hudson truck over to Bayport Bank. So it would be the 5th truck to move. It's the last truck to leave the community,
Is the Hudson one.
is the Hudson truck.
And then as soon as another truck clears their call, drops off the patient and is back in service, then you just kind of, go back up the ladder.
Right.
So truck would move back to Hudson, second truck would park at the bank, and then you just do that whole thing in reverse as the truck's clear.
So the thing that makes me most nervous is the scenario where we could be caught with rigs in Minnesota. And I don't know how often it is. I do have some data. I don't want to go into every single case, but I have 8 calls that were served to the town of Hudson since January 1st, which trucks were coming from 13 miles, 12 miles.
Well,
So one's 16 miles, one's 9 miles.
But-
So what I'm trying to figure out is I don't want to get necessarily into every nitty-gritty detail of it, but
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say is, here's the big picture question that I need to hear. Is the service area for Lakeview, do you guys feel that it is, if you added Hudson, let's say, right, with the 2 ambulances, is the service area simply too large to cover with 5 ambulances, bottom line?
no,
Okay, and tell me why not?
because of the volume. I mean, I've looked at the data, I've been looking at the data for over 3 years. Again, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know our business and I know the times of day when we're moving. I'm very confident that that is going to be the appropriate coverage for the entire area.
So some of the data I have would be explained, like what would account for some of those large miles and slower run times to town of Hudson since January 1st?
Well, there's some of the areas in the town of Hudson from the hospital are over 10 miles away. So there's areas in the town of Hudson that I think might exceed 10 miles out. So what you got to look at is, I can't tell you right now on those runs. I mean, I could
Right.
look at them and tell where they started. We know where our ambulances start from.
Some of these would say like Highway 95, 94,
Yeah,
Keats and 10th.
That's across the river.
Highway 36 and 95, Stagecoach and 22nd. I guess the other one is Stillwater, Washington and 36 near Stillwater, Walmart. So that's what I'm just trying to figure out is, in my own mind, I'm just trying to figure out, is it just too large? Or are these, the data I have, do you feel like those are just like the extremes, which are not the norm in terms of the operation of dynamic deployment?
Some of them are extremes, some of them, is the nature of dynamic deployment. You will get that occasionally. The other thing to think about, though, is that with this model, we'd be adding a 5th truck into the rotation. And just looking at when the calls happen, the number of calls per year for each of those agencies, part of dynamic deployment is a statistical game, where you're playing a game assuming that, of the 5 ambulances, you're not going to have all 5 of them out at the same time 99% of the time. So by adding a 5th truck into that rotation, we could go back and look, but I don't think that St. Croix EMS would have been out on a call on every single one of those responses that was greater than 10 miles. So it's more than likely there would have been a 5th truck closer that could have covered that call. We can't prove that, but that's the intent with the dynamic deployment.
So that might help. And then as far as mutual aid, I know your numbers are really low, less than 2 or less than 3%. And I realize that as part of the whole system, that's good for your service because you would want to bring in a truck and, take care of it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is there, I would also like to know if there's maybe too much hesitancy on your part to call mutual aid. For example, if there was a truck at, I mean, if you were sort of stuck on the Minnesota side, if this makes sense, not stuck, but you were busy, I guess is what I'm trying to say, sorry. I mean, and you got the dispatch, would you be inclined to say, oh, you know, maybe in this singular case, for example, River Falls or someone else is closer, so go to them. I'm just trying to, what I'm trying to figure out is the quickest way to get an ambulance there, and I'm not saying it's not Lakeview, but I'm trying to figure out, at what point do you say, we kind of just need mutual aid on this one? And I want to make sure that you feel good about, and free to use that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Rather than be too hesitant, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So explain that a little bit.
So if we were, you know, holding calls back so that we can get it, you know, so it's our revenue and we're not giving that away, our response times would be greatly extended.
Okay.
There's many times that we will start another ambulance service because we're out of position.
Okay.
And that's what our crews will tell dispatch. Our dispatch can make the decision because everything's mapped out. You heard Angie talk about their sophistication with the traffic, and we can easily start another ambulance, and we have plenty of history of doing that, where we start another service. Our ambulance will continue, and as soon as we hear that that other service is going to beat us to the call, then we'll go back in service to cover our area and let them take the call.
And there's been times, even just in the Stillwater area, where, you know, let's say Oakdale has been called in for a call in Stillwater, that a Lakeview truck clears and still beats the Oakdale truck to that call, even though they're both going to the same place. It's just getting the, you know, closest truck to the patient as quickly as possible. So.
Right.
We'll always start one of our trucks if there's one available. It's just then, do we also make that call to mutual aid? And I think that's your question.
That's my point, is I don't want you to feel hesitant to do that at any point, if that's what's best for getting a truck out there. That's just my point, yeah.
You know, again, I go back to one of the things that you said early on. The two most important things to you were cost and response time.
Yeah.
And response times, I think, speak for themselves here, and given their dynamic deployment model and everything else. I mean, you want to talk about how mutual aid works here. You familiar with how it works here?
Well, I would imagine we would call in a neighboring town if we needed help, but
But do you know when?
I don't know the specifics, no.
Okay, I mean, so, I mean, I think it's important that we make, if we're going to be talking about a standard, we need to know exactly what this is going to be compared to. So here, they get a call, and, I mean, we've been through this exercise already. They get a call. If they can't, if there's nobody there, we've seen it where they've had one truck, second truck couldn't go out, and then they do an all-call to anybody that's got a pager, anybody that's got a radio, no matter where they're at, all right? Anybody that can get in here. And they wait for a response from that all-call before they make a determination to go for mutual aid. Follow me?
Yeah.
All right?
Wait, isn't the all-call for mutual aid, though? Isn't that
No.
Oh, it's
It's
to,
the synchro
It's to
EMS.
our St. Croix EMS folks that have their radios.
oh, gotcha. Oh, okay. Who are not on duty? you're
What
talking
that-
about?
Not on call.
What that all-call tells everyone on St. Croix, and it's not just St. Croix EMS, it's countywide. That's the way they operate in the county. It tells all the members of that department, the all-call means we're looking for anyone, whether you're on the schedule or not,
Okay,
to please respond to the
I
call.
got you now. Okay.
So, and that's.
And you're saying they do that prior to going to mutual aid?
Right.
Okay.
Calling for mutual aid, and that's our protocol right now.
Okay.
And so obviously that can add significant time before there's a call for mutual aid.
No, I get it. I get it. I just think there's always going to be some risk in whatever service we go with. You're going to have those times when we've got these outliers because it
Right.
wasn't there. I'm not saying that's the standard. And whatever service you get, if you get too many calls at the same time, you're gonna need mutual aid. So I mean, there's no perfect system, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think the difference between, again, not just St. Croix EMS, but even in Washington County, it works that way, where They set off the tone for the department. They have 3 minutes. If nobody responds or acknowledges the call in 3 minutes, they do a second call. If nobody responds or acknowledges in another 3 minutes, it depends on the department, but they might check again, or they'll just go ahead and dispatch someone else. And that's what St. Croix County does as well. The difference in our operation, when St. Croix County calls our dispatch, they know if we have a truck or not. So it's immediate at that point. We're out of trucks, please start St. Croix EMS, please start River Falls or New Richmond. So you don't have that
Right.
6-minute delay that you would have the way the rest of the county operates.
Okay. Go ahead.
While you were having a discussion, I was thinking, oh, isn't River Falls closer than some of these other places? So I just did a map check.
Right.
Using standard driving times. River Falls Fire Department is 19 minutes away, standard drive time.
Right,
Bayport Bank is 10 minutes.
right,
I was shocked at that.
yeah,
And Lakeview Hospital is only 17 minutes.
yeah.
So
We have,
I actually had been sitting here thinking for a long time that River Falls had to be closer than that.
Yeah.
But it isn't.
we have, again, just over the years that we've done transfers out of the hospital, we know what our response time is over to the hospital. So from the time our crew gets paged out till the time they arrive here, lights and sirens average about 8 minutes from our hospital to Hudson Hospital. Routine, it's anywhere from 12 minutes to 15, depending on the time of the day with the traffic. But it's better than what we have in North St. Paul. So North St. Paul, from Lakeview Hospital to North St. Paul is 10 miles. So we're a lot close, a little bit closer, not a lot closer.
New Richmond's 28 minutes.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. So that spot that you would have a Hudson ambulance, if you needed that fifth one to be at 95 in Bayport, that response time within the city would be beyond the 90% fractile, is that correct?
Well, no,
Or no?
I mean, it might not be. Depends on where it is.
Depends on where it is.
Yeah, I mean, if it's at exit 1, we could probably beat that fractile.
Sure.
But that data from that call would be included in the
Oh, absolutely.
fractile calculation.
Absolutely.
Right, right.
Yeah, and that's the difference with mutual aid is your mutual aid calls are not going to be counted in that response. So if, a service wanted to make sure they were making their times, they would just call mutual aid because then it's not counted against them. We've never done that. We never would do that. I don't think I'd have a job if I ever did that.
I mean, yeah, ultimately, just to reinforce, my obligation isn't to these guys. I'm here to protect the patients, the citizens, the visitors to Hudson. I'm not here to make sure that our medics have a job. I'm here to make sure that what they're doing is providing a good service, that it's safe, that it's defensible if that comes up, hopefully not. But, so absolutely, yeah, if that were happening, that would not be okay with me at all. It's got to be patient-centered. That's the first priority here.
Jordan, you're the medical director?
Correct, yeah. ER physician at Lakeview Hospital. I'm the medical director for Lakeview Ambulance.
Okay. Thanks.
So in those scenarios, I guess my question would be, would you feel comfortable having those scenarios in contract language? Does it make sense to have it in contract language? And again, I'm kind of like looking at the lawyers here,
I don't know that you'd get that detailed in the contract.
right? Because that could change over time as you add ambulances,
Yeah,
add service
I think that
area.
would be one of the, we're setting up this, now I have a different name for it, whatever, Performance Review Advisory Committee.
Sure.
And this committee is, at least the way I see it, and Carl and I have talked a little bit about it recently, is the purpose is to review not just actually contract compliance, but the service, and especially, tweaks that need to be made and so forth. So I don't know if you want to go segue into it. discussion on that?
I want
or-
to in a minute. I want to kind of follow up on what Bill's asking. I mean, what we need to do, obviously, right now, we need to start reducing this conversation
Yeah.
down to language for the contract. So what are we considering then fractile language, response time, average response time language for the contract? And what are we comfortable with? What are we comfortable with? What are you willing to do?
I think they said the less than 9 minutes, 90% fractile response.
That-
And that's
a
consistent
9-minute
with
fractile?
NFP language, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I know you were concerned about average in that last meeting.
Nope, well, it all moves over, so, like, if you look at the Stillwater data, it's 8.22 fractile, it's 5 minutes, 7 seconds average, so the lower the fractile, the lower the average, so you just gotta, I mean,
You just have to.
I would love to see 845 for fractile.
I think what the mayor said was correct, though, is we should be looking at our St. Croix EMS data for the average and the fractile. And that's a good baseline for us. This is what we really, you know, that's kind of the, sort of seems to me like that's the minimum. We want to be that good
Yeah.
or better.
We're looking, I would make a blanket statement, we're looking for better. I think if we're gonna do this, I think we're looking for better. And so, I think that, I get what you're saying, you're kind of looking at Stillwater, but it seems to me like that number is just kind of coming out of nowhere. You know, I think we really do need to make a fair comparison and say, these guys in the contract are gonna have to say, you're going to beat what we're doing here right now. And, I think that's fair, isn't it?
And I do want to assure too that this isn't a number we pulled out of the air. This is a standard set by the NFPA. I might add that it is, correct me if I'm wrong, a minute faster than the county ordinance for Hennepin County? They're 10 minutes, they're at 10 minutes, so let's exceed that as well. I think it's achievable, it's defensible. That said, if we want to report for the Performance Review Committee or whoever, averages, we're happy to do that. And again, our goal isn't 9 minutes. Our goal is under 9 minutes. That's the cap for fractile response.
Can we have language that would say that? Or that your goal in the contract, can we do that? Is that too vague?
Well, you
Is
can
that-
say that, yeah.
I actually think that was
Some language that your goal is to be less than. I mean, the
no,
language
and
you
I think-
provided was less than
yeah,
9 minutes.
and that's what it should be.
And that's what you want
Yeah.
in the contract, less
You
than
want to be
9
less than
minutes.
9 minutes. We don't want to be at 9 minutes.
Right.
Less than 9 minutes is the standard, so.
Yeah, I just add, the whole idea of fractile.
And who are
I'm
you?
Ted Begleiter, I'm the president of Lakeview Hospital, is about dependability. It's saying that 90% of the time we're hitting it. And there are times that we're going to be higher. And that's where because of multiple calls and that kind of thing and our dynamic deployment working. So that's why it's the standard, because it's saying this represents reliability. And that's why I think that, when we can fall back on that as a national standard, we can really defend it to anybody. And then our goal is to beat that and to be best in class kind of a thing. That's our goal.
I think we're in the same neighborhood. I think that,
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so, who's going to get, are we going to get that data? How do we?
I have it written down. Do we want to look at 2017 and 2018 from current service? And do it,
Long way,
you're
yeah.
talking about seeing what our data is from the fractile and average for the last 2 years?
Yeah.
I'm not certain that we have it for
Well, Bill is
isolated to
saying- Bill is
Hudson.
saying that he's
Oh, you'll just
Well,
ask?
well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Somebody's got to collate it,
yep.
and we have the data.
Oh,
I mean,
Yeah.
right, we have the data for, wow,
the service
The
area.
right.
That's
Well,
my,
but the
Right.
calls would give us, I mean,
Pull it out.
yeah, I mean, you could,
You're already
I
saying.
presume we could isolate that to the,
Yeah.
I'm not sure well, if we have that, it's good. I don't know if we need it, though. Excuse me.
Well,
Because I
Paul,
think-
Paul,
we're
we need it.
satisfied.
Yeah,
Well,
I
it
think
would
we-
be nice to,
For one thing, we need to say, we've done our due diligence.
Okay,
We are either better or worse. This is the story, this is what if we go with this, that we have to know that number as well as we can.
okay?
That's a baseline for us.
Yep.
The only comment I would add is that we should look at the percentage of mutual aid calls as well, as part of that whole discussion. Because What it wouldn't include is how many of the calls are responding from River Falls and New Richmond and Baldwin and other places, which clearly is a lot longer. That is not in those numbers. And if it's a significantly higher number of mutual aid calls, those just aren't going to be factored. And so I think, all I'm saying is it's one more piece that we need to put in the equation, that's all. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Kathy.
Oh, just on this performance committee, we talked about having the stakeholders, which would be Lakeview EMS, obviously, Lakeview Hospital and Hudson Hospital, did you think, Carl? Or just Lakeview? Or just Hudson? So what is your?
I think Hudson Hospital, that's my preference, is we're going to be representing Lakeview Hospital as well, if
Okay.
that's necessary, and it'll report back through me. So I don't think we need to be overly complicated. Let's keep this
Sure.
straightforward. And
So Lakeview EMS, Hudson Hospital. And then I was thinking, but this is more city discussion, 2 representatives from the city, at least 1 from Public Safety Committee, maybe both. I'm just not sure what your thoughts are on it. The idea is to have communication between this committee and Public Safety Committee. But this committee would be more, at least at the outset, focused on the contract and the service. They would, public safety covers fire, police, and EMS, and animals and nuisance. So it would promote communication, but I would see this committee being more focused.
And it's focused on identifying the issues and
Right.
helping resolve the issues, and then reporting that
To the
to
public
the
safety,
public
yeah.
safety. And then so.
What, and that, I mean, that makes sense to me.
That makes sense to me, too. I would add, and I would ask, though, you know, as that oversight committee, I think, is focused on contractual and just sort of that performance, I'm wondering, would it make sense, at least in a transition period, having a representative from Lakeview EMS from an operational standpoint in that public safety meeting?
I think that should be there. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because I would like to see both,
Yeah.
I guess, but.
So this, I'm just putting in the oversight, and then attend public safety committee.
Right.
That would help communications with fire and
Exactly
police
right.
if there's any issues. Yeah,
Right.
okay.
But yeah, no, I agree. I think it should definitely be at least one member from public safety, if
Yeah.
not both.
Yeah.
Can we call it the Performance Improvement Committee? Instead of review?
You're naming it?
Look at it
It's all a
positively.
name to us. It's the function of it that's important, so.
Yeah.
Right. The name sometimes projects a message. so.
Right. I agree with you.
Does that include, are we talking about doing other neighboring communities within this?
No,
This
this
is us.
is Hudson.
Perfect.
Now.
My first reaction
Now,
is performance improvement sounds like there's something wrong with
I
it.
think
There's always room for improvement, man.
I know that.
Can we just talk about that for a second?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it would make a whole lot more sense to have an advisory committee for the region. Is that what we're saying?
You know what? I get that, Ted.
Yeah,
But
I
right
mean-
now, we're negotiating a contract for the city of Hudson, not for the region. If this contract is approved, and if it looks like it's going to be approved, then I think at that time, we could probably amend that language and talk to the town of Hudson.
If you're up for that,
Right.
or if we want to say, kind of like we did in the town of Hudson contract, we said, we're looking for a regional solution, that could impact how this contract rolls out, and we'll, adjust as I mean, if you're open to that, to say,
Absolutely, we
Yeah.
get that.
we could put
believe
some
me.
language in there to say.
We're not
if
trying to get you to have to go to.
5 different advisory
Yeah.
committees, that's just
Exactly.
not,
You can
Fully
just
understand.
add
or
that
4, I
as-
should say, that's a lot of.
I saw the
Additional
anguish when that came
members.
up. I got it.
Well, and I do think we want to report to each of those town boards too, and I
Yeah.
think that, but again, that's not in your contract. I mean, we're going to be reporting to the safety committee, we're probably going to be reporting here, and we're going to be meeting regularly with whatever the advisory board is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, fully understood, absolutely.
Can we go back to response times real quick?
Sure.
Sorry. So I just wanted to clarify, just so that I understand what this is saying. The criteria to evaluate ongoing resource allocation, is that, in a nutshell, adding a truck and staff? Is that what's intended by that statement?
Well, we've talked a lot about that, because there are more steps to response times and other things than just adding a truck. It might be shifting trucks that will, get better response time. Maybe we need to put one in, downtown or over whatever. And so what we're saying is these are the factors that we would be reporting regular to evaluate as we go.
Gotcha.
One of the things that we've been talking about, and maybe John could talk about the average number of calls per ambulance we have now. Because we have 2 ambulances in Hudson is a tremendous amount of ambulance capacity, tremendous amount. John, I don't know, or Nate, if you want to talk a little bit about that. I think it'd be helpful to ease your mind about, oh, boy, it's not going to be long, and we have a lot of capacity with 2 full-time ambulances 24/7.
Right. So what Ted's referring to, I don't know the numbers of what percentage each truck has done off the top of my head, but I look at those numbers all the time. So I know each one of our ambulances, how many calls they do per day, per month, per year. And we've looked at the data over here when we were negotiating with the city before. I have a document that shows the time of day. And what we did was we merged those 2 documents, the time of the day of the calls that occurred here in Hudson and all of our calls at Lakeview. We merged the 2 documents together, and we know where our peaks and valleys are in there, and it's very similar to our data. At night after 11 o'clock, it just drops right off. So I have always been very confident that the 2 ambulances here in Hudson are going to cover our needs, meaning the city of Hudson's needs, the surrounding communities that we expect those 2 ambulances to be responsible for. And it's going to give us buffer. There's the volume here doesn't support 2 ambulances, the current volume today. And you saw that from the other proposals that came in. North Memorial, that does over 100,000 calls a year, they weren't saying that we need 2 ambulances here. There's times you do when you have those back-to-back calls, and that's why they were saying, well, we'd keep people on call. So our idea is full-time ambulances here in the city, and we'll cover the need. Did that cover what you were hoping I would?
We do 7,000 calls with 3 ambulances. 2,300, on average, 2,300 per ambulance. It's very crude. We're talking about 1,700 calls with 2 ambulances. So we have a lot of capacity, and we should have real good performance. And it should allow room for growth in the community as well, for a considerable period of time.
So Bill, I think the specific verbiage there, criteria to evaluate ongoing resource allocation, we were very specific about that. We went back and forth on a few options because that could mean adding another truck and staff, could mean repositioning someone.
Gotcha.
I had a thought and it just flew out of my head.
But either way, you're looking at that if it's 3 months consecutive. Falling outside of those
we don't want
parameters.
January with 3 bad snowstorms that increase the response times to tweak things a little bit, and not react based on that. Because if you're talking about buying an ambulance, hiring up 12 people, and outfitting that truck, you're looking at $5,750,000, and we don't want to react like that just after 1 month. Let's see that, make sure this is a trend and it wasn't just a fluke because of outside factors beyond our control. That said, there's other things we can do in that period of time to analyze that and figure out what happened. But
Is there, and I'm just throwing this out there, is there a possibility that could be like a min-max, a minimum maximum? Like minimum, we would look at it 2 months? I mean, I get snowstorms, I get like heavy winter and whatever. But I am concerned that it's, not until 3 months consecutive, when if all of a sudden you see a trend,
yeah,
Bill, let me give you an example that might ease your mind a little bit. We don't wait a month or 2 to look at this data. We look at it every morning. John looks at it on the weekend. Great example. As the summer heats up, we don't wait for a bad weekend to add resources. I think there's probably not one weekend this summer that we're not adding another truck somewhere for a brief period of time to cover that. I don't think we want to wait a month or two to react to some of this stuff. That's an ongoing, everyday, and committing more resources might be a bigger discussion. But I think looking at it every day that's the job of John and Matt and others, so.
Sure.
I'll give you another example. So we do our schedule bid we bid it out on a quarterly basis. So our medics have the ability to bid their shifts, and we have requirements in there, but the schedule's done. And then I look at what's going on in our community. So an example, if you were to look at our schedule today, you're going to see that on, I think it's July 3rd or July 5th. When are you guys doing fireworks? July 5th here in Hudson?
I think so.
So we added,
I think it's before.
I think it's the weekend before,
The
actually.
3rd?
okay,
Oh,
well,
right, that's Saturday.
so either way, whatever
Anyway.
day that is, I looked on the city website when your fireworks were, we added an extra truck for that time period. It's not even our coverage area. But because we know that there's going to be a lot more calls that day, so every one of our communities that has something going on 4th of July, we have extra trucks on already, with not even looking at Hudson as being part of that plan. So on 4th of July, right now we have 6 trucks staffed and scheduled for 4th of July, the day of 4th of July, because of all the different things happening. And that's not because someone called us and said, we need to do this, but historical data, we are very busy. So that's an example of how we react.
And I'm not questioning
Proactively.
how you are proactive, I'm just talking about that ongoing basis, and I think,
Yeah.
think where I'm coming from is more from the standpoint of the first year, right? Where let's say we enter into contract, enter into contract with you, right? And after the first 2 months, it's evident that another ongoing resource. That's, I guess, what I'm
Yeah,
asking.
so overall, my preference on a lot of this stuff is to be more vague in the contractual language and give more authority to that oversight committee.
Okay.
To be dynamic and to review things and to be involved. And, the previous meetings, local control was one of the terms. That's where that would be. I understand we have to have some to satisfy people here in the contractual commit. So these were examples. These are just starting points. But I would prefer to have that committee feel free to analyze every month and recognize trends and then give us recommendations in addition to what we're already doing as to when the community thinks that more resources are needed, more so than just us.
Okay. Yeah, no, I can
So
totally
that's
see that.
just overall, that's my perspective on things, is I like the advisory committee getting the input from the community more so than putting numbers and specific things here that are going to live for 10 years and not be easily changed.
I think the discussion about the information is probably more important than the information itself. Here's what caused this. Is that a real shift, or is that an anomaly? Second month, it's there, yeah, it's probably maybe not an anomaly. Third month, yeah, okay, we got it, it's real. So it's it's the numbers and as well as the cause analysis.
Just another example, I've been here just 3 years, and since I've been here, Lake Elmo's grown a little bit in population. And I don't know how many times John has approached me with an update on where we stage ambulances because of that. What worked 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 8 years ago doesn't work now. You have to shift the resource closer to the point of impact, my words, and you do that all the time. As communities change and grow and traffic patterns change, John's looking at that to understand best how to position ambulances to keep that response time low.
I have one more question relating to this, and that's probably a question for you, John. In the scenario, in both scenarios, you refer to 911, but we
Yep.
don't talk about transfer.
Yeah, I can, it really is the same. I mean, we operate a little bit of the same, with the exception of the acuity of the transfer. So in our policy with our dispatch, and on my way down here, dispatch called me because we had a transfer that needed to go out of the metro area. So they always call me on those to make sure it's okay to do that during this time of the day. Our protocol is any BLS transfer, basic life support, that needs to go out of a facility, we need to have at least 2 ambulances available for 911. Okay? So 3 total. And then for ALS run, advanced life support run, we need to have at least 1 ambulance available for 911. So we need to have 2 trucks. So Hudson Hospital calls and said, we have a ALS transfer going to Regions. We have to have 2 trucks available at that time, or else they have to wait until we're available, or call someone else.
Say
The
that,
exception would be as if it's an emergent, like a true heart attack, stroke, major trauma.
Life.
You're dealing with a real risk in front of you versus a theoretical risk of another call coming in, and you have to take care of the patient in front of you. So if it's the last truck and it's a heart attack sitting at the hospital and needs to get down to Regions or United or whatever, they're going to go. You have to in that situation.
they're going to go, but in that scenario, what you're saying is your deployment from Minnesota would change as well then?
Well, even today, with that truck here in Hudson, we're doing more transfers than we are 911 calls in the city. So we're sending a truck over here more, 60 times a month just to cover, because the truck's on transfers.
Sure.
So we only do that if we have the availability at the time to do it.
Majority of transfers are non-emergent. So just to clarify that too, that's not.
Gotcha, that's the
taking-
other question I had, like what are we talking about percentage-wise here? I mean,
So the ultimate responsibility for that decision is the physician who is transferring the patient. So it'd be typically the ER doctor at Hudson. And it's really going to be time sensitive. STEMI, stroke, major trauma, I don't know, 6 times a month?
For the emergent ones?
Yeah.
It might not even be that many.
Yeah, it's not, I mean,
Where it's life or death, it's not that many.
1 to 2 a week on
Yeah.
average.
gotcha. So sorry, just had another thought
Okay,
on that.
well, mine's exactly related to those numbers, but
Go ahead.
I looked at the numbers of the transfers, and I just used BLS and ALS, that's all I was able to
Yeah.
analyze, and I was kind of shocked to see that the ALS were as high as they were. 75 to 85% of the calls were listed as ALS, which I took as, emergent, but you've just clarified that that's not
That just
totally the
means they
case.
might have an IV, they might have antibiotics running,
Yeah.
they might, some
Okay.
respiratory
Level of
situation where they
care.
need medications that an EMT is not allowed to give in either state.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's an emergent transfer, though.
Yeah, so that ALS or BLS code is based on Medicare's requirement of our levels of charges. So we don't have we have a BLS charge and an ALS charge and then a special care charge. So we don't have a critical care charge. There's nothing that dictates a run as critical care. You have to physically look at the run to see if it's meeting certain criterias of the state of Wisconsin to be considered critical care. Very few of the calls that we do are critical care. Not that has nothing to do with it, but I'm just referring to Bill's comment on the ALS and BLS.
Is critical care another word for emergent?
Well, it could be. I mean, you can do a critical care run that doesn't need to go lights and siren to the hospital.
Okay.
This is confusing, I understand. Critical care is a scope of practice above paramedic in the state of Wisconsin, that there's very specific things that a paramedic is not allowed to do that a critical care paramedic is allowed to do. So it just depends on whether the patient needs those medications, those procedures, those monitoring devices, as to whether or not it's technically a critical care run according to the state of Wisconsin. It, again, doesn't mean it's emergent. It could be 3 antibiotics infusing through an IV into a patient. That's 3 medications on a pump. That's a critical care run, even though it's not necessarily an emergent run. It sounds sick, but it's not, they're getting the treatment. They don't need to get somewhere else quickly to get the treatment. That's the difference.
So backing up, are you good, Jim?
Yes, I am,
All
thanks,
right.
Bill.
Backing up for a second,
Yeah.
because I don't think I wrote it down. So an ALS transfer scenario,
Yep.
you need to have 2 available
At the time the transfer is called out, we need to have 2 ambulances available, because one is going to do the transfer.
Yep.
And we need one, according to the state of Wisconsin.
One
and-
for a
And
911.
what's best practice in our operation. We need to have one to cover 911.
Okay.
Yeah,
BLS is 2.
well.
BLS is 2 for 911?
And that's just our policy, because we don't want to deplete our resources down to the last truck on a BLS patient that does not, they can stay in the hospital for 12 hours if they have to. I mean,
Sure.
we're doing that out of a convenience to the hospital to clear that bed. And we want to do that, and we want to get the patient moved as quick as we can. But that is a situation where we do run the risk if we say, okay, we're going to go do that BLS transfer with only 2 trucks left. Now I only have 1 for 911. We don't want to risk that. So we will tell the hospital, we need to wait.
And a good portion of the BLS transfers are actually going to a nursing home or discharging the hospital to somewhere else. They're not going to another hospital for ongoing treatment.
Sure. Because that's what you guys are doing, would you feel comfortable having that in the language of the contract?
That's up to Carl. I mean, I don't have any reservations on that. That's what we do. It's
You know what I mean? Like,
written in our dispatch center. That's our policy that we told our dispatch center.
What would happen if your policy changed? I mean, and we have the language in our contract, can we accommodate that? Pardon me?
If it's tied to the policy, then obviously we have to consider,
Yeah.
it would necessitate a change in the contract. But we can contract with whatever we want to contract.
Right.
We don't have to tie it to a policy necessarily.
Okay. I just want to make sure, I mean, if all of a sudden, through continuous improvement, for example, you change your policy and make something more efficient, better, I don't want it stuck in a contract that, unless you guys, the wordsmiths, can figure
Our
that
primary
out.
goal is 911. That's what we're in the business for, is to protect the people in our communities that aren't at a hospital. I mean, the hospitals are our partners in what we do, but they're in a care facility. The exception that Dr. Peterson talked about is those true life-threatening emergencies where somebody will die if we don't get them moving as quick as possible. Those we treat like a 911 case.
right.
But
So in that scenario, I just wanted to ask you this scenario, right? So you have an ALS call and you have your 911 ambulance is already out on a call or gets
Yep.
called, right? Simultaneous, let's call it.
Yep.
When that happens, in your scenario, are you bringing one from Stillwater to like the Bayport area, or would you be bringing one to Hudson?
if we have more than 2 trucks available, while that truck is getting called on it, we move one over here. The only time we don't move one over here is if it's only 1 truck left. So if we only,
I see.
4 trucks are out on
That's just a
calls,
standby place,
Yeah.
placeholder or
it's
whatever.
just to cover, it puts us in a location where we can respond efficient to our entire area.
Okay.
Again, you got to look at the difference in what happens in the other communities. They're not shifting coverage like we do. So if another call comes in, they're calling mutual aid.
To build on that scenario too, let's say you have a transfer, ALS transfer that gets called to the hospital. You have 2 other trucks for 911 calls, and now while that truck is getting ready to load that patient, you get a 911 call. There have been times where that truck hasn't been committed yet to that patient, and they have to put that transfer on
transfer, you mean?
standby
Sure.
because they're not going to have that other truck available for 911 calls. So that happens all the time, I mean regularly.
Our dispatch will, if another call comes in, and that's the closest truck, they'll say, have you guys made patient contact yet? Once we make patient contact, we're committed. So in some of those cases that Paul was referring to was the exact scenario where we were coming from, the one that we came from Stillwater in January. It was a very critical patient, young patient that needed to go now. Our crew was there in the ED when he came in. They were helping the hospital. They immediately went and got their stretcher, got him loaded on the stretcher, and that 911 call came in at the tubing park. The truck was on its way over here, but they were on Highway 36, on Highway 95 on their way over here. That happens a lot. Where you commit to one call and another one comes in. None of us can ever predict those scenarios.
How many times, or has there been times that all ambulances have been depleted over your entire service area?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know times. I can tell you that. I can run a report. It's a very confusing report, but it shows me by hour how many trucks are committed to a call. So I've shared that report with you, I think maybe the last time that we were talking, or maybe in the very beginning of this, we showed that report. But
Gotcha.
it breaks down per hour how many trucks are on a call.
I think that's part of that statistical game, and I don't know if game is the right term to use because it's not a game, but it's, you know what I'm implying with that, is you're not going to have calls during that brief time that you're out of trucks completely. And a lot of times you have a truck that's either headed back to the hospital or in the hospital, and they can cycle back and turn around. So I've heard that too, where they get a call and they say, because they know 802 is unloading at the hospital in Lakeview, 802, can you clear to take a call in Stillwater? Because they're still going to get there quicker than the next closest mutual aid truck.
That's probably in most cases, that's what happens to us, is we'll have all trucks committed on something, but again, our dispatch is seeing our trucks live on the map, and they know that they got a truck a few blocks away from the hospital, maybe a mile away, and we know how long it takes our mutual aid to get to our area. They will ask the crew, are you guys going to be able to drop and turn around? And if the answer is no, we're starting mutual aid. And if it's in a critical situations, a lot of times the dispatch will start the mutual aid and then ask the crew, are you guys able to do a turnaround, quick turnaround? There's other times where the crew says, no, we can't. This is a patient we can't drop and just go. But yet they're in the ED and they'll call the dispatch and say, we're available. Where's the other mutual aid service? And we've taken those calls. So again, it's if we think we can get there quicker, but we're not going to jump in front of our mutual aid that's, committed and they're responding just because we want the call. We don't need to do that. So we'd rather have that truck go back in service and be available for the next call than to tell our mutual aid partner to go back home.
Right. Thank you.
Can I go back I'm still thinking big picture, so sorry, not in contractual language. So Ted, you were saying that on the Minnesota side, you would average like 7,000 calls a year. Or John, sorry.
That's total calls. I think our don't quote me on this, but we're around 700 in Wisconsin. 700 calls occur in Wisconsin.
Okay, I thought I heard Ted was saying it's 1,700 is what you said?
Including the city of Hudson, which we know.
If they were to take over.
If you were to take over.
The region,
That's what I'm trying to. So here's
Yeah, in our current service area,
Yeah.
so 2018 data, we're somewhere around 700 calls
Okay.
in Wisconsin. So that doesn't include the town of Hudson. So we've been averaging 20 calls a month in the town of Hudson.
So is it safe to say that Ted's number, the 1,700, would be like if you were in Hudson, I'm saying with the two ambulances, is that a ballpark figure?
For the region.
For the region and the Wisconsin side, I'm trying to ask, if the Minnesota side 7,000 calls and Wisconsin's like 1,700 or
No.
2,000? Let's just say two.
I think the total picture, that's what we're talking, total ambulance calls, if we had the town of Hudson,
Yeah,
I think we're at 9,000.
The city.
Yeah, the city.
right, so I'm saying 9,000, right?
Minnesota side. Just this region.
Oh, I thought okay.
Just this region.
2,000.
2,000, I think.
I think it's 2,000.
20%.
I think it's 2,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the big picture question that I'm wondering. So there's obviously more calls on the Minnesota side. You have one more ambulance, but I've done the math on this before. And if I don't know if this is the right assumption, but my question is where those ambulances going to be. So if I had 7,000 calls on the Minnesota side and only 2,000 on the Wisconsin side, and I had 5 ambulances, I feel like the total service has to shift a little bit to Minnesota. What the number I have is 1.4, if you make it as a fraction. 1.4 would be like the ambulances on the Wisconsin side, on average, to cover those 2,000 calls. So I'm just saying if those are evenly distributed. So that's my big picture question, is if you have 5 ambulances and you're getting 9,000 calls, 2,000 in Wisconsin and 7,000 in Minnesota, is it true that you're going to need 3.6 on the Minnesota side, and you could do it with 1.4 on the Wisconsin side?
I don't know, I can't predict what it's going to be, but
I think I know where you're at, Paul. The difference is we're committing 2 to this side of the service area for the city of Hudson. And when you compare that to our Wisconsin service area as it exists today, and the rest of our Minnesota service area, we don't have contracts that say your ambulance has to be parked in Stillwater all the time.
Right.
We cover the entire service area, and that's how we can do that. Now, the
What I'm
difference
trying to
is
say is,
if we
where,
put
practically speaking, where are those ambulances going to be?
well, we're committing 2 to the city of Hudson. What John is hopefully depicted is the only time that last ambulance would shift out of the service area is when it's the only ambulance left in the entire fleet.
No, I get that and I appreciate that. I guess what I'm saying is that other ambulance, so could be, it could be in Bayport often, it could be,
Except both of them are committed to being stationed in the city of Hudson, the hospital. If you read our
well,
commitment.
I know that's where they start. I get that that's where the shift starts. But what I'm saying is you get into the heat of the day and you're getting all kinds of calls every day. My temptation, if I was in your shoes, and tell me if I'm wrong, would be I would want to shift one of those ambulances to where I'm getting more calls, which is on the Minnesota side, or at least have it kind of leading off. So if I can get back to Wisconsin, so that's just, I mean, help me with that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. In the heat of the moment, reality sets in. How is this going to play out? And we don't drift trucks like that. That's, I guess, whatever assurance we can give you on that. Our trucks reposition when dispatch tells them to reposition based on actual calls that the other vehicles are going on.
But that's what I'm saying, there's 7,000 calls on the Minnesota side, so those 3 ambulances are going to be tied up more frequently than the 2 on the Wisconsin side with 2,000 calls a year. So as those 3 are getting demands on them, I think dispatch probably would tell them you need to shift over, because now you're the backup for the Bayport area.
we're only going to shift in the scenarios that you have there. So the scenario we gave you is when we shift, not just,
Right, and I'm trying to say, objectively speaking, these are the numbers, 7,000 in Minnesota and 2,000 in Wisconsin.
Paul, I think you need to, again, what I do, I guess, is go back to response time. So they've got 3 ambulances that are covering those calls over there. The response time is 6 minutes and change. And the fractile is still what it is. I kind of understand generally what you're getting at, but the numbers aren't supporting what you're saying. They don't need the other trucks over there. They're doing fine with their response time and their fractal right now with that number of calls.
In the Minnesota side, you're saying?
Yes.
Paul, again, we're not going to stand up here and say we're going to put 2 trucks here knowing that
No, I get
that's
that.
not going to work. I mean, things change, but again, that's why you have that oversight committee to, keep the checks and balances going and making sure we're meeting our obligation that we committed to.
And if that's a number that the oversight committee wants to see, that's data that can be obtained too.
We don't want our trucks responding from the Minnesota side. I'd like them to be available all the time here, but that's not always going to happen, and it doesn't happen today. It doesn't happen in any of the other communities over here in Wisconsin. There's times they are or Minnesota, that they're completely out of their resources and ambulances are coming from another community. We did 256 mutual aid calls in different communities last year, just Lakeview. That's a lot of mutual aid calls to other communities where they didn't have, we're not giving away that many calls. So it happens every day in EMS.
Right, but you understand what my concern is. I mean, you get what I'm asking.
Yep, it's busier on the Minnesota side, and
Yeah.
you can see how the trucks would tend to drift over there because that's where you anticipate the calls happening. And so we do separate, it's not a hard line, but there is a fuzzy line, I guess, between Minnesota and Wisconsin where there is extra priority placed on keeping those trucks in Wisconsin, even though the call volume might lend itself more towards Minnesota, which is why it's not going to be until the last truck that's available that it gets moved over out of
Right, and I
Pleasant.
appreciate that. I think that's
Because if we were really looking at the overall service area, we'd be moving trucks, before it got to that point to cover the entire service area, but we do want to prioritize this area.
right.
I wanted to touch on entire service area for a second. Remember when we sat down here for the first negotiation, right? We were talking about defining what the service area that we were, right, talking about. And coming down to this fractile and bringing that down because we're talking about the city.
Yep.
I guess what I would like to see in the contract, again, talking big picture, but also talking long-term, is defining that area with the 2 ambulances stationed in Hudson, maintaining that defined service area through growth that you may see in this area. Does that make
I
sense?
see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is that,
So as, let's say you have a development on the far eastern side of the township that starts picking up, what's to say we aren't going to shift one of those trucks farther out into the township away from the city?
right? Or, going into a different community, for example?
No,
Can we get, and I guess I'm looking at the lawyers at this point too, is that,
Well, right now, the
Don't-
resources in the contract would be dedicated to the service area that would be defined only at the city of Hudson. So those 2 ambulances would be available for that service area, and that's the city of Hudson only.
okay, so then I'll ask the obvious question then, how does that differ if the village of North Hudson or the town of Troy approaches Lakeview for a contract? Then are you adding an ambulance for them? You wouldn't be, right? That's why I'm trying to get to
Yeah,
that.
the 2 ambulances just for the city of Hudson would have quite a bit of extra capacity to cover those other areas, and so we'd have to find where's that saturation point where we have to think about adding resources, and that's, again, the oversight committee, the regional oversight committee would play into that. The city obviously needs to protect itself, and then some of those thresholds that we discussed, if those end up there too, would be the points to look at.
So,
I
and
think-
that would be, obviously, I think that is I don't even want to say a concern necessarily, but a good, strong probability that if this gets done, that the service area is going to expand, and probably quickly. And then there might be some other communities, not just our former partners, or current and/or former partners, but there might be other communities that are going to say, this looks like it makes a lot of sense for us too, farther east.
right, and if that's the case, again, our commitment to the 2 ambulances here is based on our analysis of the need for this community.
Gotcha.
So we're investing a lot of money in building a building here that's going to house us for many years to come. Once we do that, we're not going to go build something in Village in North Hudson because, they're going to build something over there. We're coming from where we're at. That's there's just not buildings you're going to find out there that we can, just move a resource out of this area. We need to commit the 2 to here.
Gotcha, and I guess that's where I'm trying to drill down to make sure that that's in the contract language, that we're
But you-
defining that area up front for those 2
Yeah,
ambulances.
you are saying that the 2 ambulances will serve Town of Hudson and Village of North Hudson if the Town of Hudson already has a contract.
Yeah.
Those 2 ambulances are intended to serve the town as well as the city? That's what we need to be clear on.
Yeah, when
I'm not
again, in our
necessarily
proposal, we were looking at the big
Okay,
picture.
so when you say community, I think we'll need to define, it
Yeah.
contemplates addition of
Yeah.
the adjacent, I would say like the adjacent portion of Troy, Village of North Hudson, and
Right.
Town of Hudson, who used to be our service
Yes.
area.
I think,
Okay.
Yes.
like we mentioned a couple meetings ago too, if it goes beyond that, let's just hypothetically say River Falls, Baldwin, New Richmond, we can't cover those communities from here or vice versa. So that, I don't even think,
I
wouldn't
understand
even
that, I
make
just
sense,
would
yeah.
want
We
some
need to
sort of
have
protection
that
in the
in
contract.
And you're right, and that goes back to the original RFP, the proposal that was submitted, presuming that every one of the communities was going to be included in that.
And that's why we were so careful about building that into the Town of Hudson contract, so they know that we continue to pursue a regional solution
Okay.
where we can really partner as a region.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So we don't include, the 2 trucks that are here aren't included in our response plan on a regular basis into St. Joe's and Somerset.
Yeah, okay.
They're committed, or the truck today is committed to here, and it stays here unless it's closer. An example, on my way over here tonight, we got a call at County Road A and Scott Avenue, or Scott Road. Technically, it's in St. Joseph's Township. It's in Burkhart, but the dispatch said the Hudson truck's going to be the closest truck to it. But if it had been beyond that, the Stillwater truck would take that call. So this truck is for this area. In the future with the contract, the 2 trucks would be for this area. Village of North Hudson, City,
Town of Hudson
Township, and
and portion of Troy.
Yeah,
Yep,
Basically what St. Croix EMS
Yep.
is currently.
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
Or Town of Hudson.
Well, we should make that clear to the contract,
Yeah,
and that's all
yep.
I'm
Right,
saying.
that's all I'm saying.
Yep.
What else? Were you done with the advisory committee?
Yeah, I think Carl and I can talk about it, but I think we'll put in, I'm just thinking of language, we'll have these, just give the committee authority to change parameters to improve service. So like if your interfacility transfer, if you have a better way of doing it, and all the committee members agree, which are all the stakeholders, I think that could be implemented. So I'm thinking more of just putting more authority, just in terms of service improvements that the committee agrees upon,
Yeah.
as just giving them some kind of authority like that. But have basic, have the response time in the contract. And I took this language, mutual aid rate of more than 3% of overall, I don't know if that goes in the committee or in the contract at this point, but I think it's good to define criteria, but we want to have some ability to be flexible.
Yeah. I
So
think the mutual
we
aid
can
thing,
work
just
with
to
that.
hit, if that is going up, the response times, well, that's not necessarily true from what we've said earlier, so forget that.
You're saying some of those.
Some criteria I think we want in the contract, just to force the issue, at least discussion. I think it'll be discussed more regularly in the committee, but just something in the contract to say, hey, that something needs to be done here. I'm not sure exactly what that language will be, but we know we want response times in there, the 9. And then I don't know about all these the criteria for determining when to add resources. Or shift, yeah. That's a little fuzzier.
Some of them could be in there as limits, or others
Yeah,
could be in there
right.
as targets.
To have a
or
little bit
goals.
of,
I wonder,
to
See-
force it if we really need to.
language in contract that would say it will trigger, falling out of the bounds of these criteria will trigger an evaluation
Yeah.
and a corrective
Yeah,
plan.
remediation plan.
As
We
opposed,
had in
what
the-
I'm hesitant to do is say, 3 months of this triggers another
Right,
ambulance.
right.
That's just
Yeah.
Yeah, plan.
too
Yeah.
crude of a,
Right.
but if we are required to do a corrective action plan, and we do that, and now here we are, 70 months later, and it hasn't changed, shifting the ambulance to another location hasn't made an impact, then we have a serious conversation about whether we need more resources.
Right.
It just automatically triggering after, it feels
Yeah,
like
I
we've
get
got
that.
more levers to pull than just that, that's
Right.
all.
Okay.
A question is, as this goes on and we look at some of these goals or targets that might be in the contract, and we decide, the committee and everybody, all the municipalities decide, this is a better number, that number's incorrect, can't reach that with, you know, can we do an addendum to the contract so that that's for future, for 8 years from now, whoever's in the offices has this addendum? Is that possible? It's just
Sure, we can, I mean, it just.
you may want to put something in there now,
I think it's
but.
gonna have to be, yeah, the same parameters aren't going to necessarily apply for the full 10 years. There might be better ways of doing things, I don't know.
Yeah.
And growth, and, I mean, there's gonna have to be flexibility.
Okay,
The words aren't coming exactly.
so we're just not, whatever we write down, we're not nailed to it for 10 years.
Jim, I
It's-
think you're on the same page as me on that, just seeing how those metrics aren't going to be the same 10 years from now, or 8 years from now as they are today.
Well, that's why I said have the committee authority to change parameters or service standards to improve service. Because I think you're gonna have to be evaluating it.
Between having the standards that can be used as criteria and annual goals that we set with each
Yeah.
other,
Right.
those two things, I think, would really have us pointed towards continuous improvement. And we haven't talked much about continuous improvement, and they teases me about getting on my soapbox about continuous improvement. We have implemented continuous improvement across our Valley hospitals and clinics, and Nate, John, and I have all been through training, all certified. We have the methods and the tools in place to evaluate problems, to measure them, to implement new ideas, to measure the implementation of those new ideas, and make those visible. So if you could go into any of our Valley hospitals, and you could walk into the administrative offices and see all the goals visually laid out on the wall inside administration at Hudson Hospital. Same thing in my office at Lakeview, same thing at Westfields. I would see that kind of visual management for our program as well. And so that is what drives continuous improvement. Real good measurement of the goals that you set, making those visible for the team, and then using the methods and tools to drive improvement. And we've got that going. We're about 2.5, 3 years in with that methodology in the St. Croix Valley hospitals and clinics, and we're starting to get real momentum. And I would welcome you to come over and I could show you, or we could go over to the Hudson Hospital, the kinds of improvements we're seeing in quality, in experience, in other areas as well. So,
I got a question about the oversight committee, or what did you name it?
Continuous Improvement Committee.
Yeah,
Performance improvement,
So,
continuous improvement committee.
so I just want to,
continuous, I like continuous
Be in
better.
that. Maybe we
just-
put some language like that in the contract. I mean, just to give the sense that these things may be adjusted in accordance with a continuous improvement program over
Yeah.
the life of the contract.
I said earlier I wasn't going to focus on the name and the semantics of it, but I've had a little change in plan here. When you look at a committee or an advisory board that just focuses on the metrics and what you can do, that's one piece of it. I think for what we want to do for the community, we want to have a place where we can get together and understand what we can do to better serve the city of Hudson and the surrounding communities. When Pepperfest comes, when the 4th of July festivals come, when there's going to be a surge in people, whether the Packers come to town or whatever that might be. We want to be able to have those conversations as part of that group as well. Those shouldn't just be us talking through those. So I think that'd be a good place to include that proactive, what are we going to do next summer? What are we going to do this fall? What do you got for the Gopher Badger run? That's more than just continuous improvement. So there's my little
So you have a name?
Yeah,
No,
I
I
thought you were
don't.
gonna come up with a name. I thought you had.
I'm just changing the name. You guys can come up. But I think we have to have a place for
And the
that
vision
too.
of it.
Because that's important. It's more than just
Sure.
response times and
Oh,
fractile.
yeah, no,
and-
I agree.
It's service to the community too.
So I just wanted to ask, just from an operational standpoint of the committee or that function of the committee, I mean, are we talking that this is, you know, an odd number of people on this committee? Is this done by vote? I mean, how do you see that playing out? Or is it just sort of not as formal as that?
I
Maybe
almost
not.
think it has to be, I mean, this is what's coming to my mind, consensus, it's the stakeholders, meaning Lakeview, EMS, Hudson Hospital, and the city, and possibly municipalities.
I don't,
I mean, I'm seeing a good synergy. I'm just asking just from,
It's what do we put in the contract about their authority?
right, yeah, exactly.
That's a good question as to exactly how much
I mean, like,
authority they have.
let's take a-
Or do they recommend something to the public safety committee or to the
Right.
council, or how does that work?
let's take a look at, like, the current EMS commission, for example. We have Tom Borowski, right, as a member, and he's a voting member unless we're talking financial, right? I don't know if it's something that we need to delineate like that.
Well, it would depend on what, I mean, yeah, if you can't spend money, at least
Right.
city money. I'm not sure.
I don't know, I
Maybe-
just throwing it out there, I don't
Yeah,
know,
that's
just something to
gonna
think about.
take
We don't have to
some
figure it out
thought.
right this second, but,
We do have to charter it, though.
yes, exactly.
This
What does
this
that
is
look
how
like?
it's gonna work.
Responsibilities are
Right.
as an entity,
Right.
right?
Quick question on the supervisor paragraph. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't misreading it. There was a discussion about the use of the shift supervisor. However, implementation of a shift supervisor is an operational decision based on entire Lakeview service area. A supervisor should not be contractually required for this contract as its scope is limited to the city of Hudson. I'm just making sure that it should say is not limited to the city. I would assume that the shift supervisor is somebody more broad,
Contract scope is limited to the city of Hudson, so the
Oh, I see what you're
supervisor
saying.
applies to the entire.
entire
fleet.
service. Gotcha.
You know, worst case scenario, everything else goes away and we're left with just the city of Hudson.
Right.
We may not need a supervisor on shift
Sure.
overseeing those two ambulances 24 hours a day. So we just wanted to make sure that wasn't in the contract to obligate that, even though it will likely be there as a resource for the whole service area.
Got it. Makes sense.
anything else?
We've gotten some pushback from citizens, people who are involved, that they're not so certain that I am responding is a question of reliability of it. And we did talk about that some at the last meeting, and I'm wondering if there's any way that we could get some data, information that, because people always talk about the one call that they never received. You know, my wife doesn't receive calls sometimes 8-10 hours later, but on her
Those
phone,
from you,
but mine
Jim?
works. For mine, yeah. Well, that's it. But my phone seems to work, and I don't know what that is. But that's, we hear those anomalies, and they always bring them up. It's just like the call that took 27 minutes instead of 17 minutes, you know, so
Right.
it's, is there some way that we can get to any information around that's,
Some performance information.
Yeah, I can check with the company. I honestly, I don't know. I mean, I talked to the sales rep for the state of Wisconsin, who's the sales rep for Minnesota, and he's the one that just gave me a very high-level overview of
maybe he
what I
can
am
refer us to
responding
somebody
Yeah,
that's using it.
yeah, we would have to check with them, but remember
I'd like
that's,
to build the confidence in that piece, because
Yeah.
it's really critical to addressing that gap that we've been talking about.
Maybe we could find
Right.
someone who's using it in this capacity too, like, you know, any
Well,
funds,
lacrosse.
yeah.
I thought, didn't you say, or you're the person from the...
Elfriver is using it with Alina.
Yeah.
Lacrosse has a different system.
Oh, I guess I thought it
Yeah.
was lacrosse.
But everyone in the county is using it. I think your fire department's using it, your EMS is using it, all the first
Terry said it's
responders.
being used, yeah.
And so everybody here is using it but us. We didn't need to because of our own dispatch center, so we didn't need that. But again, this is kind of to alleviate your concerns and our concerns with that delay.
All right.
Well, you know, it's always good to compare,
Right.
right? So, I mean, I don't want to just take that as a one-off and look at it and say that, you know, it has a 99% accuracy or however you
Yeah.
would term it. What's that compared to? You had said that every system will fail every now and then, so, you know, how does that compare to VHF?
Well,
How does that compare to, you know, I mean, if they're at 99% too, right?
yeah, that's a great point, because you'll hear, you just, you know, ask your fire department personnel if their pagers have ever not gone off in their house. I'll guarantee you that it's happened. You know, you're in a certain part of the room, and for whatever reason, their pager never went off. So I don't know that anyone has the ability to measure that. But I get to enough meetings all around our service area, and you hear that all the time. I sit on committees at Washington County, the 911 center, and you hear the fire department say, none of our pagers went off on whatever call. So there's failures all the time in the system. Again, we were just trying to assure you that we found something we think will alleviate that delay that's there. And again, we don't have that delay anywhere else. So it could be,
Anywhere else where you're using the phone.
See if we
Right.
can find more on the reliability, essentially. That's what you're looking for.
I think I get that, but I don't want that to get lost, John, what you just said.
Right.
You know, that delay isn't happening for you anywhere else.
that's right.
I got a question. So you are in the midst of purchasing VHF radios?
The radios, yeah.
The radios, right?
Yeah, we got pricing on them, and I can do that tomorrow. I just
Sure.
hadn't got around to pulling that trigger yet.
Can those VHF radios be programmed to have a pager go off?
No, I don't think so. Bjorn, do you know? I don't think they can.
looking at specifically, but usually the handheld radios don't have.
Yeah. It's a separate pager. We did order
okay.
pagers. We have them, they're actually in our possession, they're in Matt's office, to put in Hudson Hospital. So we hear the page when it goes out. But we didn't purchase them for all of our ambulances, because that's not, our crews, when they're busy on something else, they're not gonna be able to be listening to that radio or that pager. We just did it as something to help us get going en route quicker. So
That's something that's static to the hospital then?
Yeah,
They're not-
we'll have them in our call rooms up there at the hospital. I don't think, they probably won't go in the ambulance with the crew, but they'll be in so in the hospital, we have a hard time hearing the radio. So
Gotcha.
however the towers are situated here in St. Croix County, a lot of the times it's not tripping the radio, so they don't hear it in there. So again, tonight on my way over here, they didn't hear that call go out over the radio if they were in the room. So, and again, that happens in a lot of buildings that you get in where you can't hear anything.
Is the county aware of that?
I think they are.
Okay.
I know, we know there's spots throughout the county that are difficult to pick up on the radio. When they go to the digital system, that will help some of that, but they're still on analog here in the county.
Even with that, there's spots in the county,
Right.
you get in valleys, there's fewer of the VHF towers because they're longer wave, but they don't penetrate as well. So you get in valleys and there's spots where you lose VHF radio coverage, so it's not exclusive to the Minnesota radio system.
I got one other thing. So, we had talked about this at the first meeting, but I would like to see some sort of a long-term incentive clause in the contract. And what I mean by that is, I'm still a little bit worried or a little bit concerned that if Lakeview would pull out like 2 years from now or 3 years from now or something like that, we would be left in a tough situation because, we would need cash to hire people and get back in the game, so to speak. So, and I know, Mr. Mayor, you think we have the escrow account.
We could
So,
do that.
right, so, but what I'm thinking is, what I'd actually like to see is a combination. I'd like to see a combination where, like, in the contract, there would be some kind of a fine if Lakeview just pulled out on its own, that would be steep, or it would step down every year for like 5 years. And after the 5 years, it wouldn't be there anymore. And I don't know what the amount would be. So as that was stepping down, the city on the other side would be stepping up, or escrowing each year, so the amount will go up. So at the 5-year point, we would have the money for the future, long-term if we need it. But if it was in the short term, I think it might be harder to come up with that. So I would like to put a little bit of that on Lakeview, and I don't have a number in my mind. But I like the idea that it's a shared responsibility, because it also would provide the incentive to stay in long-term, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And Paul, we have every intent, that is our plan. What I get concerned about, and I pushed back to you at the time, was while the city is saving 200, 250, 270, whatever the number is, dollars per year, we're investing in well over $1 million ambulance garage that would now sit empty. We're investing in ambulances to cover this, which is more investment. We're hiring a number, 8? Some number like that, 8 paramedics that we would be hiring, who, if we shut down the program, which I'm not sure why we do that, but if we did,
Right.
we would be paying them severance. So it feels like we're taking we're taking all the risk, and you're getting a $250,000 savings every year, and I'm struggling with why that's not enough risk for you, and because it seems like pretty significant investment in this community, what we're doing and the risk that we're doing. And in all the while, you're getting tremendous savings every year that we're doing this. So that's where I'm struggling with that, Paul. And I am, and I said this the last time, I am tremendously confident in our ability to perform here. I think if it was language that if we pulled out for no reason and for whatever, maybe there's something. And if that's what you're getting at, maybe. But I don't know why we would just pull out for no reason. So
Right, I don't think it's going to happen.
yeah.
But I'm just thinking about it as a potential partnership in covering the worst-case scenario. And I don't think it would
I'll
ever
tell you
happen.
what, what we could consider is, we're okay with that if we get a new council and they vote us out without reason, that the reverse happens. If it goes both ways, I'm perfectly, and you can pay us for the ambulance garage, and you can pay us for the ambulance. So I mean, it's only fair that it goes both ways. And if we can figure out language that we both feel is sharing the risk, maybe there is something we could work out. So I'm okay with that, but I feel like we're making a pretty good investment in the community. That's why I've been so struggling with that, Paul, okay?
No, I understand.
Okay.
That's kind of fair, isn't it?
This gets back to the question, and I don't know if, and again, I'm looking at the lawyers on this, is it worth putting in sort of the for cause or with cause type of termination?
Oh, yeah, we'll have.
And
yeah,
having some
we'll
sort of
have that in our
impact there
contract.
and-
So if someone.
Okay, I just wanted to bring that up, make sure that
Termination.
that's on your radar. So.
And typically, that goes both ways too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. All right, anything else? You guys have anything? Any more? Here's what I'm thinking. All right, we've got, the lawyers need to get together and talk about language right now with everything that they've heard. we're going to obviously need to go over all that language to make sure it reflects everything that we heard and we believe that we said and agreed to. There's more to this, obviously. We're going to have several more meetings. Kathy is
Out
all next
tomorrow
week.
and next week.
This is me.
Okay, so why don't we look at the following week? And Devin gave me times that were available in here. Did you take those?
I didn't see that past the 3rd. What he gave us wasn't past the 3rd, though.
He,
Or he gave you a new one. All right.
yeah, he gave me this at the last meeting, but, because I saw it only went to the 3rd. How many meetings do you want to have in that week?
Are you talking about the week of the 5th?
6th, yeah.
One, if you're asking me.
All right,
Because we'll need
if it's one, then I would
towards
propose,
the end of the week.
I would propose the 9th, Thursday the 9th.
So we have public safety from 5 to 6. Usually only goes an hour the most.
Okay,
So we could do after public safety, which is usually in here. But I'm part of public safety, so I'd like to be here too.
all right.
Is it possible to be looking at like a first draft of the language? I mean, is that
Well,
what we?
that's why I'm literally back in the office on Monday. I don't get back into town until Sunday.
So that would be a
So
no.
we need, well, maybe Carl
You're all
can,
next week, Ken?
yeah, I'm out all next week, but that would be on my list of things to do, to try to get something put together, at least draft.
Yeah,
But
and that's all
why I
I'm
said
talking about.
later in the
Not,
week.
you know, even if we saw like an outline of like elements with maybe not everything
Yeah.
filled in, just sort of,
I've
just so that we're
started
all
on some
talking the
of
same.
performance, and to be honest, I can, maybe, I'll take my iPad with me and can maybe email back and forth a little during the week.
You shouldn't do that, Kathy.
Might make life easier when I get back, so.
At no charge, right?
Yeah. No, I get up early even when I'm on vacation, so.
I think I'd like to see, I'd like to see a draft before we meet again.
Before we meet again? So you don't want to schedule anything for that week?
I would rather see some.
Well, how about this? How about if we put it on the schedule for the 9th, and that's 6:30?
Yeah, that's a safe time.
Okay?
For me,
And if we don't have what we need in front of us, we'll just cancel the meeting.
Okay.
Okay? Does that work?
Yeah, confirm it like on Tuesday or Wednesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's too bad that Scott wasn't here for our discussion that included the fire department. Anyway, are we good? Everybody good?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys. Is there a motion?
Thanks.
Not quite yet. Could we circle back? Could we do one more communications meeting in there somewhere? Not before then, but just.
Oh, yeah, we can do that again. Make sure
There's
that
a couple of
everybody's on the
questions I
same
had on
page.
the
Sure.
county end
You
that
mean
I'd
on
like
the
to ask.
dispatching?
On
Yeah.
the dispatch.
We can maybe even do it that night, you know?
If-
No?
I think if we have something in front of us, contract, I think that should be the focus personally.
All right.
I like having a focused meeting on one thing, so.
All right.
Move to adjourn?
Second?
Motion second to adjourn. Jim, are you hesitant?
Yeah, we've got a couple issues that Hudson needs to talk about, first responders.
Yeah.
What do we
Right.
want? So somewhere in this process, I don't know, it's not, the contract could probably be signed without it, but I'd sure be a lot more comfortable if we knew what we were doing.
Yeah.
We know we have the intent, let's put some
Okay,
meat on that.
sounds good.
Can we put that on the next agenda for council? The first responders piece?
I was thinking of taking the first step with public safety,
Okay.
which meets coincidentally on the 9th, right,
Yeah.
leading up to it. is starting that conversation, because we have,
That works.
chief of police,
That
chief
makes more
fire
sense.
chief.
I think, yeah, wherever it has to
And then
start.
that can get floated up to council, because I don't know that it needs to be.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay,
Yeah,
everybody good?
it gets it moving and gets it on our docket, so, yeah.
Does the 9th work for you guys, Paul? I'm wondering in that case, if we're talking that first discussion, if that we should do 7 o'clock instead of 6:30? Just to give us a little bit more time in public safety. I don't know what that agenda looks
Oh, for
like.
the first responder thing? That's fine. 7 o'clock, okay with you guys? I'm sorry about that, but
Oh,
that gives you more time to eat, have dessert.
We'll be across at Pedro del Este.
Okay, sounds good.
Tap and
so
barrel.
7,
All right, 7 o'clock, we'll do 7.
if we do it.
Everybody.
If we
yeah,
do it right.
If we do it. Everybody good?
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion's approved. We stand adjourned, and thank you all once again, everybody, for being here this evening.